And when I discovered it, that really what was screwing me up in life was that I missed my mommy. You know what I mean? Like I had never recovered from the loss of her. When I reached puberty, she basically rejected me. And even though she only died about less than 10 years ago, we were estranged for most of our adult life. I mean, that wound never truly healed until she was on her deathbed.
And welcome to Permission to Heal. I am Marcy Brockman, and I am thrilled that you are here. Today, I have the pleasure of sharing with you a conversation I had with Erika Schickel, who just published her new memoir called The Big Hurt. We had an amazingly raw, honest, open-hearted, and vulnerable conversation. She is an essayist and an author. She is from a notable family of writers for generations. Her grandfather was a writer on a ton of very notable 1950s and 60s sitcoms like The Dick Van Dyke Show and shows of that ilk. And she began her career as an actor, because she, I guess, didn't want to continue in the family business, but it claimed her already. She was in The Toxic Avenger Part 2. She was in The Nightmare Code and The Practice in 1997. She wrote, her first book was You're Not the Boss of Me, Adventures of a Modern Mom. She has taught memoir and essay writing at UCLA and privately, and her work as an essayist has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, LA Weekly, LA City Beat, Salon, Ravishly, Tin House, Bust Magazine, and the LA Review of Books, among others. She lives in Altadena, California. She's the mom of 2 children and a cat mom. Lots of cute pictures of her cat on her Instagram. Her new book, The Big Hurt, took me a hot minute to read. It is so vulnerable and so frank about her experiences growing up and her own inner torment and the abuse she suffered at the hands of her parents and the intergenerationality of all of it. And she tells the story of her seduction by a teacher in her senior year of high school, her subsequent expulsion from her school, and the reverberations of that event that traumatized her throughout her entire life. The book takes on the themes of generational shame and explores the many ways that women get labeled by society and forced to live with those identities. And we talked about misogyny, and we talked about all sorts of sexual abuse, and how men in our lives, especially when we are young, but men in our lives feel like it is their right to use us. It's their right to take what they want from women, and without apology. And with the popularity, for lack of a better word, with the growth of the Me Too movement and people coming out about these kinds of situations for girls and women and for men and boys, I think we're finally starting to shed some light on what is a very dark chapter in many, many people's lives, and the trauma that this creates, that reverberates throughout decades of our lives and can travel through generations as intergenerational trauma. That the things that we go through are things that will have some reverberations in our children's and our grandchildren's lives. And who's to say that the things that we've gone through weren't caused by things that our mothers and our fathers and our grandparents and our great-grandparents didn't go through? There's a whole field of study in the last, certain amount of years of the epigenetics of trauma, the psychology of this, that is, I find utterly fascinating. And for those of us who are on the quest of personal healing, and finding out how to make sense out of all the things that have occurred in our lives, this can help us, I think, get a little clarity. So I hope you listen. I hope you enjoy it. I can't recommend enough that you go out and get yourself a copy of The Big Hurt. It is mind-blowing and phenomenal. I left Post-its and wrote on the pages, and having a conversation with myself and with Erika about the book the whole way through. And it brought up so many things for me that I have healed and that I need to still work on. And I don't think the process of healing is ever complete. I think we get to a certain point where we feel a lot better and we're able to stop repeating the same things in the past. But through stories like this, through sharing of our stories like this, we are able to heal ourselves and reach out into our past and heal our ancestors, and reach forward into our future and heal our children and our grandchildren, and hold each other's hands and heal each other. It's a beautiful story of one woman claiming her own narrative, and I hope you'll read it. And I hope you'll listen to this podcast and share it with everyone you know, and and give us a 5-star review, and leave your comments and so on. And if you have the ability to, I hope that you will consider subscribing to the Permission to Heal Patreon subscription, and help me make more episodes of this and help other people benefit from these important conversations, because it's through these conversations and giving ourselves the permission to love ourselves and heal ourselves that we're all going to heal. So thank you all very much. I'm so glad that you're here. Good. Okay. So welcome to Permission to Heal, Erika. So excited to talk to you about this book.
I'm so excited to be talking to you, Marcy. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I devoured your book, but I had to do it in several sittings over a little bit of time because it brought up so much stuff for me. And I just, I stuck Post-its everywhere trying to have these conversations with you about what was going on in your life and your kid. I mean, Yeah. And there's so many things that you say in the book that confirmed for me that this was a perfect fit for this podcast and this audience, and for me specifically. You say on page 269, you said the only viable currency in the world of trauma is being able to tell your story. And that's what we're all about, you know? Yeah. That's why I wrote my book. That's why you wrote your book. That's what the way that I think that we heal, the way we try to figure out what happened, why it happened, make sense out of the intergenerationality of the whole thing so that we don't repeat anymore. We can get rid of that toxic template that we were born with, not pass it on to our kids, not pass it on to anyone else, and use ourselves as a inspiration for others. I guess it sounds obnoxious to say it that way, but an inspiration to others to not do what we did, or if they find themselves in those situations, that there's hope to get out.
Yes. Amen, sister. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
It is the only currency, you know. To understand ourselves is to understand each other, you know.
Right.
So I'm so glad you resonated.
We had childhoods that were vastly different, but as my listeners will know, because if they're following along this podcast, they know that, you know, my mom was an undiagnosed bipolar, self-medicated drug addict most of her life, extremely narcissistic from her own childhood, mishigas, and what I did not realize, because I was so busy trying to figure out my own place in everything, I kept seeing myself as the victim, and my dad was narcissistic and not really in the picture. I mean, in the picture, but not involved.
Not enough. Yeah.
No, and he left me with her. You know, he was so mad at her that he left me with her. And I was, you know, I still can't reconcile that with him. And he'll be 81 and he can't answer it anymore. So whatever. But there's so much that the looking for love in all the wrong places that you did, that I did. You know, if you don't get that love from your parents, you don't feel that safety, you don't feel a connection, you don't feel like they have your back, then especially as a girl in your adolescence, you just try to find it wherever you can. And I think that the society that we're in teaches us at a very young age that the only sort of, well, they try to get us to believe that the only sort of currency we have is our sexuality. Yeah. And so how do you find the love? Through sexual relationships that are too mature for your pay grade, you know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And of course, you're too young to even understand how loveless those attachments can be, you know?
Right. And each time you convince yourself, this is it. If I love him hard enough, if I do this well enough, if I'm good enough girlfriend, if I'm pretty enough, if I fulfill his needs better or enough, he'll stay, he'll love me, he'll give me what I need. And it's never the case.
No. And you got to learn it the hard way, don't you?
Right.
I mean, I hope my book will help spare somebody their pain, but you know, I think in the end you learn it the hard way.
Yeah.
And then when you get older, you realize how common it is, you know, that, you know, your little world of shame and hurt and longing, which you think is just yours to bear alone. It's just so common, you know.
Common and tragic, and it's tragic in its commonality, and because people used to not talk about it.
Yeah. There was really no language for it.
No.
I mean, think about all of the language we have nowadays surrounding this particular kind of hurt. I mean, first, the language around trauma, you know, which is something that's only really come to light in the last probably 2 or 3 decades, scientifically, psychologically, and then in just sort of the popular vernacular, really only in the last 10 years, I would say, where people are really becoming comfortable with talking about it and understanding its nature.
And how it not only affects your whole life, and that if you don't do the work to understand yourself, if you don't dig deep and figure that out, then you're just doomed to keep repeating it.
Right.
Over and over and over again until the universe at some point either gives up on you or hits you over the head with a 4x4
Yeah,
or something.
I know. Yeah, that's exactly what my story is about. Yeah,
Yeah.
just how I kept at it until I, finally had to I learned the lesson.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen until I was deep in my 40s.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's, your whole life is the story here, but why now? Why? I know you've been writing this book for a good 10, 12 years, something like that,
Hmm. Hmm.
percolating on this, trying to figure out how to tell the story, but what compelled you to tell it?
Well, I mean, there's so much compulsion going on, it's
Right.
kind of hard to sort of strain it out from, but I'm a writer. I had written my first book, which was a humorous memoir called You're
Right.
Not the Boss of Me, Adventures of a Modern Mom. And I had sort of branded myself as a humorist, as a person who just wrote funny short essays.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do the same thing. I knew I had a big story in this boarding school story. So, just briefly, the book, the first half of the book tells the story of how I was sent to this Bohemian boarding school in 1978 in the Berkshire Mountains. My parents sent me away, and I sort of made an ersatz family up in this very small private boarding school in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Um, and
A
yeah,
lot of feelings about that. As I was reading, like the second before I'd get to the line where you would tell your feelings, I would write in the margins, "Does she feel abandoned?" And then you say, "I feel abandoned." Are you outraged? I'm outraged. It's just like I was so mad at your mom. Like, what the hell? And then she moves to New Mexico. Like,
and none of that at the time struck me as in any way extraordinary or literally out of the ordinary. I mean, I was raised in a very sort of, oh, so sorry, a very privileged family on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Both my parents were writers and sophisticates. I was encouraged to be a very sophisticated child. And, like any kid who is raised in an odd circumstance, I mean, it seemed it was all I knew.
right. So it's totally normal.
Yeah. And of course I had been gaslit by my parents
Mm-hmm.
to think that I was a bad kid, a bad girl. I mean, they loved me, both my parents loved me, but fairly conditionally. And
Mm-hmm.
when I didn't please them, both of my parents, especially my mother, was very good at just yanking her love away.
Yeah.
um
Utter
and
dismissal.
yeah, just and back to the subject of trauma. This is now we are coming to see that this kind of experience as a child is pretty traumatic. Like even
Mm-hmm.
before I got sent away to boarding school or raped or any of the things that happen in this book, really the big hurt is about the loss of my mother.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that that's what I was suffering from my whole life
Mm-hmm.
until I started trying to write this book in my middle 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the mother wound. That's a thing we don't get over
Oh,
until our souls and the universe are ready to let us get over it. Until
the mother
we
wound is a real bitch. It really is.
hell freaking yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
uh yeah, so I mean, to understand this book, I mean, the book is also very much about romantic disappointment and all of that, loss of friends, loss of community, loss of self-respect. So many
All these
things are
different types
lost.
of abandonments that people suffer that are
Yes.
all so intricately linked.
And my life is a sort of a bizarre study in that kind of sort of benign neglect, on the scale from benign neglect to outright abandonment. And I sort
Mm-hmm.
of suffered it all. But because I was raised in privilege and because I was gaslit my whole life, it never occurred to me that something that like that had happened to me.
Right.
And when I discovered it, that really what was screwing me up in life was that I missed my mommy. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I had never recovered from the loss of her. When I reached puberty, she basically rejected me. And even though she only died about less than 10 years ago, um, we were estranged for most of our adult life. I mean, that wound never truly healed until she was on her deathbed, and she acknowledged it, and much to her credit, and allowed me to like forgive
Yeah.
her.
Closure in a way that very few get.
Yeah, a form of closure. Although, as I say in the book, closure is a shuck. This idea
Right.
that, oh, now I have written about my mother pain and I have put it away,
Right.
does not
No, it's just the
help
beginning
in
of
those,
digging
yeah.
into the well. Yeah.
Yes, in those moments where, I observe other mother-daughter relationships, or my own relationship with my own two children, and where I go, I missed this. Who would I have been if I had had, a constant mother, a mother who just loved me and had my back no matter what.
Where do you get your notions of motherhood? I've read through the book that you were able to eventually heal your relationship with your own children after your own love affair, so to speak,
Yeah, yeah,
collapsed and all of that stuff.
yeah.
Where do you get that from? Just
It's a
curious.
really, it's a really good question. And I'm trying to come up with a really good answer for it. I mean, partly it's just from becoming just psychologically aware.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I mean, first of all, I am a love-based creature. I mean,
Yes.
loving my children was never an option for me. But whether I was able to demonstrate that love consistently, I mean, that's sort of technique, isn't it? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
Both my parents loved me, but they were not good at making me feel loved. So, when I was in my late 30s, I met a woman who had a mother very much like mine. And she handed me a book. We were drinking wine together, and she went, wait right here. I'll be right back. And she rushed into the next room and came back with a copy of The Drama of the Gifted Child, which I
Ah,
don't know if you're familiar with that book, or
no.
your listeners are. I'm forgetting the author's name. I'm a little groggy with jet lag, but it might come to me.
I'll look it up.
But really, it's about that sort of narcissistic break, and about how children, the pain that is caused when we are raised to be exceptional children and to reflect our parents, and the loss of self, and the loss of like genuine self, that
Sure.
we hide our real selves so that we can be pleasing the parent, and we lose ourselves to ourselves. And the same wound has most likely happened to the parent who made us this way.
Sure.
And after
Absolutely.
reading that book, I really saw my mother in the book. I saw myself in my book. And more importantly, I was repeating that pattern
Mm-hmm.
with my two girls. I had two daughters born female at birth. One is non-binary, so I will henceforth refer to them as my kids. But
Yes.
at the time, they were both girls to me, and that sort of set me off on a journey of really looking into, who my mother was,
Mm-hmm.
what happened to me. And I decided that no matter what happened, I was going to stop, acting as my mother had, becoming
It's
angry,
scary when you see that, isn't it?
yeah, turning away from my kids in anger, slamming a door. These were all the things that my mother had done with me.
Right.
And when you're a young mother, you don't know what the fuck you're doing,
No,
and
God, no.
you reach for the examples you have witnessed, and most often you reach for what your parents did to you. So by the grace of God, I saw what I was doing, and I stopped it. And also I had my kids were both enrolled in a really wonderful humanistic preschool that gave me some really good, good parenting skills that I
Sure.
needed, and, allowed me to give my kids space for their own feelings and stuff like that. And then when it came time to write the book really taught me the lesson. I began writing the book in 2009, and it kicked my ass.
Yeah.
I realized that if I was going to go into it, I had to go all the way through it.
Yeah,
And
you
I
can't dip your toe in this. You're either in or you're not.
Right. And I did not, I did not want to go all in, which is why I engaged a love affair with a notorious crime writer. Because I started writing this book, I saw the hurt. The hurt ate me whole. It just swallowed me up. And then suddenly, I had an opportunity to blow up my marriage for an insane person. And honestly, that seemed like the safer option to me, to return to form, to be a bad girl, to do
Because that
something.
was what used to be your template. That was
Yes.
home, so to speak.
Yes.
And your marriage to your husband was your attempt to get out of that, but you still got sucked back in.
Yes. Yes. And I had sort of remade myself after I was, so again, for your readers, in my senior year at boarding school, I was seduced by a music teacher. And
I'm asking questions totally ass backwards, aren't I?
Yeah, I know. But I just, I feel sorry for your
out.
listener because they're hearing all of this stuff out of context. And so I was seduced by this teacher, and 6 weeks before I was going to graduate with honors, I'd already been accepted to college. I was a great student and an upstanding member of the community. I'd really found my home and my artistic voice in the school. It was my family. I was all in on this school and about to graduate in glory,
Mm-hmm.
and the affair was found out, and the school essentially kicked me out, fired the teacher, and, more or less expelled me. I mean, they said, we cannot legally expel you because you are still our responsibility. However, we think that you should leave because you're going to just upset everybody if you stay here.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. And so I was
sucks for them, sucks for you.
Off in the middle of the night, I was gone. I was spirited out of that community and mailed my diploma. And I went to live with this teacher in nearby, in a town nearby in North Bennington. And then at the end of like 6 weeks, he too kicked me out. So I began my adult. He
was a big piece of shit. I'm sorry.
He was an enormous turd, and may he roast for it. But I essentially entered adulthood just completely traumatized, and feeling like of just a total piece of shit that nobody wanted. I wasn't wanted at home. I wasn't wanted at school. The teacher didn't want me. And so because I was only 18, I was just 18 at the time, it sort of formed this personality, this urge in me to like prove my worth to the world by being just the best girl ever. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Los Angeles. I married a respectable man I did not love passionately. And I raised 2 kids devoutly. I mean, I love my children. But yet I struggled, it's hard to, I've always been a very expressive person, but I have always felt like making myself smaller to make myself. It's been a hell of a trip because it's hard for me to
refashion yourself to feel like that you're worthy of the love that you crave.
Yes, so that I can be kept. But it was a false identity. Again, here we are with the drama, the false identity. Once again, I could not find myself. And when I met this man, who I call Sam Spade in the book, but is easy to Google, I felt like like we said, a return to form. Like, I can go back and be what I really was, which was a bad girl who wrecks everything. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't who I was either, was it? It's so
comfortable because you've known it before.
Right. And I was suffocating in this good girl identity, and also in a marriage that had gone cold, and, and just this feeling of just being a fake person, it was painful.
That's awful to have to live that way.
Yeah.
And then you're not sure where you're going, where's the real person inside.
I had no idea. By the time I got into that affair, I was sort of like the funny, sort of witty kind of, I had this sort of, I don't know, like I say in the book, a sort of je ne sais fuck you, that also wasn't really who I was, and now, because I wrote this book, because I healed myself as far as one can be healed, I think, through the offices of writing, of analysis, psychedelic drugs, 12-step program,
Shaman healing. Yeah, you
the
did.
whole, I mean, yeah, I did it all. And it hurt. It was hard.
The only
But
way out is through.
the only way out, as they say, is through. Yeah.
Tattooed that shit on my arm so I wouldn't forget
Oh,
it.
yeah, there it is. It's absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not fun, but necessary. You know,
Yeah.
Dr. Shafali Sabari wrote a book about conscious parenting called Conscious Parenting. And in it, she talks about how we have to heal ourselves before we can be the parents that we need to be for our kids.
Yeah.
And you proved this, absolutely. My life proved this, absolutely. It wasn't until I tried to figure out who I was after my mother's death that I was able to really come to terms with all of it and be the parent that my children needed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like early on in my terrible first marriage, I figured out enough to know that I needed to get out in order to save myself, but in order to save them, because I didn't want this marriage for them. I didn't want them to think that this was what love was. But then I didn't know what it was anyway, but I knew what it wasn't, you know?
You know, I think love is self-love. I mean, I really think that, again, by loving yourself and coming to terms with your own pain, that's the only way to come to really love another person.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And that's
going
hard
back,
to be vulnerable enough to let yourself do that.
yeah, yeah. And I think I was always vulnerable with my kids. Like my kids always knew that I loved them, but I was parenting in an unconscious manner. And I cannot claim to like have had some great revelation, you know, back in 1998 that set me forth on the path of brilliant parenting. I mean, I fucked it up every step of the way, you know, and I still do, you know. I mean, it's all every
We're
day is a
humans.
new day of figuring it out with parenting. Now my kids are even adults, and it, you know, it's so much better, but it's also still, you know, I have a lot to learn. But the one thing I do know is that coming to love yourself, forgive you, recognize your mistakes, your failings, the places you went wrong, the places where people did you wrong, not in a feel sorry for yourself in a way, but just in a way that just you can cut yourself some slack, you know, like we are so hard on ourselves. And really, we're just children inside, like learning every day. We're still learning a new thing about how to be an evolved human being, you
Right.
know?
Absolutely.
And the best life is one, I think, that keeps climbing upwards towards that sort of awareness, self-enlightenment, whatever, you know, you're never done, no closure. But you can put some things away. You can put some things to rest. And with this book, I really did put some things to rest.
I think you did.
Yeah.
I think you did. Towards the end of the book, you started to put pieces together better. You know, you called your mom's friend, and you had some conversations with CJ and so on, and Allie and so on. And I think that figuring out all of those loose threads, you know, that the boarding school kind of used you as a cautionary tale and completely revamped their entire process, you know, their entire way of educating and dealing with kids. And I think that you said even in the end that there's still no closure from them, that they're still.
No, they have not revamped anything as far as I can tell. I mean, they have publicly acknowledged that there has been a past in which, I mean, you know, sexual abuse was pretty much a part of the culture of that school when I was there from 78 to 82. And I'm sure, you know, in the Me Too era, you know, everybody's a lot more careful and aware and so forth. That said,
but
the
it was
school
the
has,
80s. You know, I'm 4 years younger than you. Actually, my husband and you share a birthday, which is pretty funny.
oh, that's funny.
But I'm 4 years younger than you, and I had a music teacher in my public high school who shamelessly flirted with me and tried to convince me to run off to France with him when I graduated. And I didn't even realize until years later that that was inappropriate. I just
Because
thought, it was just so funny.
Yeah. Well, because also as girls, we are just trained to seek approval in adult men. I mean, they are the keepers of the culture. At least they were then. I mean, it's changing now. But in that time, they were, and especially in my world, they were, men were the keepers of the culture. They had the keys to the kingdom. And back to what you said earlier on, where a girl's only currency that we were allowed at that time was sexuality. And it's not that we were, I mean, I was a lissom, beautiful young creature back then, but I had a pedigree, and I was legitimately a brilliant girl, and all of that fed into the egos of the men who came after me. It wasn't just that I was cute, it was that I held value to them. That there was something that they wanted to entitle themselves to of me. And it was just in every interview I give at some point, and it's mostly with women close to my age, at some point we will say, oh, it was a different world.
It was a different
and it
world.
Really was.
It was a different world, but that doesn't excuse the behavior. Luckily, we are more aware. I'm a public high school English teacher by day, and we are very careful about what is said and what's not is said. And you're never in a classroom with the door closed alone with a student ever, ever, ever. You never offer them a ride home. You never leave yourself.
And that's really good. And I'm so glad that those sort of guardrails are now in place, and that there are ways, if students do fall victim to sexual assault of any kind, that there are outlets for them to report that. But I also worry that if we think the guardrails are up, that then that's enough. And I think that there's more to this conversation in that it's not just enough to protect girls from predators or children from predators. It's that we need to acknowledge the inherent worth of girls, why they are worth protecting, why they are as important and as full of potential as boys are, or the adults that are, in there are taking care of them or supposed to be taking care of them. I think we need to progress the conversation to really, so that not only it's just guardrails, but it's genuine regard for the humanity of children and, and the vulnerable.
And learning how to raise our boys so that they don't grow up to be predators.
100%.
It's when you see the statistics reported, there's always a percentage of girls who were raped or assaulted, but it's an equal percentage of men and boys who do the assaulting, who go after the inappropriately young, innocent girl. So
for every girl, for every victim, there is the predator. It's absolutely true. And also, one of the reasons I dedicated the book to CJ is not just because he was my beloved friend who helped guide me down this path, as readers will find, but that, to remind people, like, it's not just girls, any situation, and God knows we've seen this in the last 10, 15 years, with the Catholic revelations in the Catholic Church, in the Boy Scouts, in private schools, in any situation where adults, non-familial adults, although even sadly familial adults, but where adults are left in charge of children in a sort of unsupervised structure. And just as in the Catholic Church, these predators, at least at my school, they didn't get kicked. If they got fired, my predator got fired, but he was also teaching simultaneously at Bennington College, and
they did nothing about it.
School never let Bennington know that they had a predator on their on their faculty. So, and that's called passing the trash. I mean, that's the term for it. And, so all of that, has to stop. And it's just the whole culture of predation is, it's still here. Just because we have outlets for victims doesn't mean that the culture that creates these situations isn't still going strong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you talk in the book about intergenerational trauma, about the epigenetics, if you will, of how you're being victimized by your teacher and falling prey to the gaslighting and the abuse and so on was the third incidence of this in your family.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could talk about that a little bit.
So,
because this just fascinates me, the whole epigenetics of this. In a previous episode that has yet to air at the time of this interview, I have a cousin of mine who was an addict, and we talk a lot about epigenetics because our mothers are sisters, and my mother was an addict and he is, but it's all from the same.
Yeah.
We're traced it back to Russia, to our shared great grandparents.
Sure.
All traveled down, It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. It's real. In my family. So when I was kicked out of boarding school, my parents, of course, had been toxically divorced for several years at that point. And my father was furious with me and he wouldn't speak to me. And my mother, with whom I had been estranged off and on since puberty, in this moment was like, darling, come to my bosom. And she was living on Cape Cod with her partner at the time. And I went down there and she was just all warmth and acceptance. And I learned that it was because she too had had a disastrous, well, that's my word, not hers, a love affair with a teacher when she was at Sarah Lawrence College. And she had gotten involved with a psychology professor there. And she sort of framed it to me in very romantic terms and treated what had happened to me as a romance, and in fact, my teacher came down to the Cape to find me and she welcomed him and made him dinner and then sent me off.
I wrote WTF and 1,000 exclamation
to live,
points. Like,
yes,
are you freaking
him.
kidding me?
Yes, I know. Because
but when you were 14 or 15 years old, she let you go out with a 35-year-old man anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
So like, I have no words.
So my mother, there are things I know about my mother and there are things I only suspect about her. And she died in 2016 and took some secrets with her. But what I was able to piece together about this affair through like Googling this man whose name was George Goethals, and he had published, I Googled him up and I found that he had published 2 books. They were sort of,
adolescent psychology, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. One was called The Role of Schools in Mental Health. And the other was called Experiencing Youth.
Oh, he experienced youth all right.
Yeah, he really liked to experience some youth. So, and my mother was cited in the public schools book because she had followed him from Sarah Lawrence to Harvard on a Woodrow Wilson fellowship and had helped him in his studies. And she was interviewing children for this psychological study he was conducting at Harvard. And it was through those interviewing and writing up those case studies of those kids that she decided that, in fact, she wasn't a psychologist. She was really a writer. She liked writing those up. And she had always told me that story as a kid. I knew that she'd worked on some psychological study, and she had told me a story about, a boy who thought her name was Jill Whedon, and she was known as Miss Whedon. And the boy came in and had stars in his eyes because he thought that she was actually Miss Sweden, a beauty queen. Awesome. So I'd been aware of it, but it wasn't until this thing happened that I realized that we had had this same experience. And then after she died, I interviewed her best friend from childhood, and they'd gone to college together. And it was her friend Joanna who really said, this experience completely changed your mother. She went from being a fun, loving, warm, funny person to a very cold, standoffish, sad person, the mother that I knew. I mean, I knew both things about her. Of course, she was funny and brilliant and so forth, but she was in some way wrecked.
Yeah.
And and I came to see that it was this affair with this teacher that had wrecked her, and that my great aunt, a generation before, she too had married her English teacher at the age of 16.
Wow.
So, and it was a very short-lived marriage, it didn't lead to much. But in my great aunt's time, of course, that marriage between children and adults was much more accepted.
Sure. It was like 1915 or 1918 or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. So,
it legitimized the affair. So she didn't get scandalized because she wound up being the missus.
Exactly. So, there is the culture we lived. I mean, we're soaking in it, this kind of, thing has just been the way of the world for women, for girls and women, where it is acceptable to, be with much older men. And when I was a kid, also remember 1970s, Pretty Baby and Taxi Driver, and there were all these examples of Woody Allen's Manhattan. It was just so cool back then. The Child Bride was a cool thing. I'm so glad we've evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Woody Allen, and I reading your book and all of the circles that you sort of skimmed through your friends and your friends' parents and the socialite kind of in New York, and just that image of you and your friends spying on John and Yoko through the window and seeing them wash dishes in the Dakota. And I was like, I stopped my husband from what he was doing, and I'm like, can you believe this?
I know. I mean, in many ways, I had a magical childhood, and I was sort of at I was in the eye of the cultural storm, in Manhattan in those times. And my father was a noted film critic. He was Richard Schickel and wrote for movie reviews for Time magazine through all of that. So yeah, it was super privileged, and odd in that way, but we were not a rich family. I mean, we did not have like family wealth. My father, we were upper middle class because there was an upper middle class in those days.
Right.
And my father paid for our entire Manhattan lifestyle by his typewriter, just as a freelance writer.
More money, let's write
and
something
an
else.
author. Yeah. Deadlines, books. He just hammered them out, so.
Kind of prolific writing like that awes me.
I mean, that's what I grew up with. My father wrote 37 books, and he made 37 documentary films as well. He became a documentarian later in life. So, he was.
And your ex-husband worked in his production company or something.
Yes, it was sort of a family business. So he was very prolific and brilliant, but he was also sort of on another level narcissistic and clueless. Like he never. I mean, as somebody who was such a brilliant interpreter of narrative, right? He was a film critic and an author, and he never understood my narrative. He never understood what happened to me at Buxton. And he always sort of was like, oh my God, Erika, when are you going to move on from that? And it wasn't until after he died that I finally put all the pieces of it together, And
there was a letter that he wrote your mother where he was basically like, we failed her. It's our fault. You were cold and you were distant and I'm culpable too. And I thought, Richard, you're finally getting it. Amen. Yeah. And then like 4 pages later, he's a shithead again.
I know.
I'm like,
I know.
What? the
he
guy
ha-
had whiplash and I wasn't the daughter.
he sure had his moments. And, I mean, to his credit, I will say that I never doubted for a moment whether he loved me. With my mother, in the end, I know that she loved me, but I didn't always know it,
Yeah.
And on some level, she never loved me enough to really just be there for me
To
consistently.
get past
But
her
my
own
father was
needs.
always there for me, even though he was a misogynist and had no taste for female narrative. He did
No,
not.
he was even what was that piece that written about Jerry Salinger? And
Yes. And
yeah.
in fact, oh, so yeah, and I don't know if this is too literary for your audience, to get into, but when I started writing this book, I read a book called At Home in the World, which was a memoir by Joyce Maynard, who had an affair with J.D. Salinger when she was beginning her like freshman or sophomore year at Yale. She was on the cover of Time magazine Sunday edition, with a sort of world weary view from an 18-year-old looks back on life, And like me, she had sort of the same parents, the same kind of upbringing. And I started reading this book as I began to write my memoir, before I had met my own notorious writer, before I began that affair. And the
Sam
book just,
Spade. Yeah.
Sam Spade, the book just resonated for me and really broke me open. And so there's a sort of payoff at the end of my book, which maybe I won't spoil it for your readers, because
Yeah.
there's this sort of aha moment where the Joyce Maynard story comes full circle. But suffice it to say that my father had no appreciation for women other than as
Trophies.
sexual creatures,
Yeah.
handmaidens to his ego. And I, in his eyes, was a junior version of him.
Yeah.
He did not understand my woman's story. He only understood me as a
An
reflection of him.
extension of him. Yeah.
Yes.
His smoking buddy from the
Yeah.
past. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a wonderful relationship on that level. I don't want to throw that away or
No, no,
downgrade
no.
it.
Of
It was a
course.
great relationship, and I miss him dearly, and he loved me and he did the best he could. But, in some ways it wasn't so good.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a therapist in the late 80s, early 90s who said something to me that I'll never forget. I was trying to figure out whether or not it was worth risking the vulnerability to continue to have a relationship with my father, especially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said to me, "You obviously don't get to choose your parents,
Right.
but your parents, by and large, unless they're a sociopath and, whatever, they're not out to hurt you. They're not malicious. They're
They
not
do the best they
looking,
can.
right. They're doing the best they can with the tools they have available. And so your dad may be trying his best and can't do anymore. This is just who he is. So you have to decide, is having a relationship with him on whatever level he can muster good enough for you?
Yeah.
Or
And
do you want to walk away?
that's something that everybody has to decide for themselves. I certainly walked away from my relationship with my father for short periods of time where we would just piss each other off. When I first told him about the end of my marriage and getting together with this other writer, he was furious with me, and he wouldn't talk to me for like 3 months. We just stayed off the phone, and we were both living in LA, and we were very close. We would go talk to each other every few days. So, I mean, there were times when I had no time for his shit.
Do you think he
But for
was
me,
pissed that you would like rock his boat because
it
your
was
ex-husband
all,
worked with
yeah,
him and
it was rocking his boat, and he kept saying to me, I just want to know, I'm in my sunset years, and I just want to know that everybody's happy and settled, and why do you have to wreck everything,
because you're not happy and
And that's
settled.
exactly what I said. I wasn't happy and settled,
Right.
and it's not about you. Stop making it about you.
Exactly.
But, back to the epigenetics, a real point of healing for me came, and this was actually during an ayahuasca ceremony
Hmm.
where I which I pursued out of just, I was in agony and I was looking for any way to level up through the pain. And I went on this journey where I went and I flew around Los Angeles. I went into the backyard of my mother's house, and I saw her standing in her backyard as a little girl and just lost, alone. I
Oh.
saw my father in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and as a little boy. And I saw my lover as a young, lost, abandoned, neglected child. And then I went back and I saw myself back in my apartment at 19 East 88th Street, sitting in my window seat. And it just, it sounds almost trite, and you can never tell a drug story and have it sound good, but it was so deeply healing to me to understand that all those people who had tormented me were just lost, lonely children themselves. And that's where that healing comes in. Like, if you can heal yourself enough to stop handing down that damage to the next generation, then I feel you've been successful in your human life.
Fuck yeah.
And that, because the more we are coming to learn about reality and the non-linearity of time, that by healing ourselves, we heal our ancestors.
It reaches forward and backwards simultaneously.
And backwards, yes. It's really profound. We are multidimensional. We are fractals, and to heal ourselves, as I said at the beginning of this, is to heal each other. And it's compassion for ourselves that brings compassion for the people who hurt us. And I have no bitterness. Well, maybe I have some bitterness, but I have relatively, I try very hard not to have too much bitterness on any given moment, because I understand that all of these that hurt people, as the saying goes, right. And you just, if you're going to forgive yourself, then you're going to end up forgiving other people as well.
Yeah.
And that's
peace. Hard. Forgiveness is hard.
Yeah. Forgiveness is incredibly, incredibly hard. And there are couple people out there that I still struggle with, on the forgiveness score. And I haven't gotten there yet. But as far as my parents are concerned, and as far as myself is concerned,
which is the most important,
I wish I'd done better, and I forgive myself because I did the best I could.
You did the best you could with the tools you had. You were just looking for love. And ultimately you came up with the idea, you shared it with us in the book, that the love that you really had to look for, you found in yourself.
Yeah. And it's almost a cliche. I wish there was some
maybe
brilliant
a cliche, Erika, but it is still true.
Yeah.
It's still true, I think we all struggle with self-care. I think that's the biggest struggle. How do we fulfill our own expectations of all the roles that we have, but really ultimately take care of ourselves?
And especially, those of us who have been forced to grow up in the totally relentless, unforgiving structure of Western culture, where we are given so few opportunities for inward looking, so few opportunities to be still with ourselves and figure out, look at our stories, tell our stories, rewrite our stories. I feel so very blessed to have been born a writer, which I really was. I never went to school for it. I just sat surrounded by people writing my whole life.
Well,
so
there's got to be an intergenerationality of that as well.
It's the family trade. And literally, I've gone back through generations, and all of my people, whether they were clergy or poets or archivists, everybody in my family tree is a writer of one kind, all the way up to my sister's a writer. My kids are fantastic writers. Hopefully they won't do it professionally, but I was given a really powerful tool for self-healing. But I would say to your listeners, pick up a pen, really just pick up a pen for your own sake and write it down. Tell your story the way you want to tell it, the way it is true for you, because even if it's just a journal, a letter to yourself, maybe you want to self-publish a little book to leave for your children that tells your version of yourself. Do it. There's so much healing in that.
Oh my God. I talk about this ad nauseum. I've been keeping journals since 1983.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I was giving myself a life raft. It saved myself, saved my ass, saved my brain, saved my soul, saved my heart many, 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 many times over. And I was an only child. I was the only one going through what I went through in the way that I did. There was no one to share it with. My mom had effectively cut off anyone that I would have had as, as somebody to go to as a safe haven. And that was all I had, was the solace of a journal.
You were bearing witness to yourself. And and especially I would see as an only child, how important that would be. My other great blessing is my sister, Jessica, who's not in the book very much, because we were practically raised separately. We were separated at a very young age, and we found each other again in adulthood. And when we did, and we got to know each other, we were blown away by how much we had in common, not just because we're sisters, but just what we think is funny, and the terrible men we found attractive, and the hurts that we bore, and all of our hangups were we had come out of the churn of the Schickel family as sort of the same product in a lot of ways. And so thank God I have my sister who is always there for me and can bear witness to that fucking crazy childhood.
Yeah.
And she is a fantastic writer. Oh my God.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So I mean, I had a couple of really good advantages that saved me in the end, but I look back on my life and I think, God, who would I have been if this stuff hadn't happened to me? If I hadn't been consistently thrown away by every single adult that was responsible for me as a kid,
You did a lot of floundering, but it taught you hardship teaches us resilience. Yeah. Hardship teaches us that even unmoored and cast adrift, we can find our way to shore. We can teaches us to be our own lifeboats.
Yeah. And I think we're really coming into a time where that kind of awareness is becoming more available to people. And I really hope so. I mean, I know that we are speaking from the left and right coasts of this country. Yes. And, where, this kind of investigation is sort of more ordinary, psychological inquiry and so forth. But I also think that we're coming to a time where people are really beginning to put it together, the trauma piece and, the codependency, the way addiction is really just a response to pain.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And some great thought leaders are showing us the way, whether it's, Glennon Doyle or Brené Brown or Gabor Mate, or
Brené Brown has saved my life single-handedly.
Yeah. Or, even going back to, Terrence McKenna, may he rest in peace. There are people who are guiding lights for us to evolve. So we're in a good place, and it's thank God for it, because we need it now more than ever. We need to save ourselves so that we can save the world. It's as simple as that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Truer words were never spoken.
Yeah, there's no time to waste. Everybody, pick up your pen.
Pick up your pen.
Be kind to yourself.
Permission.
Tell the truth.
Start telling your story. Absolutely.
Love on yourself. Love on yourself. Love on thy neighbor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So normally I begin podcasts with the 6 quick questions, but I totally forgot about them again.
Me too. Did you ever ask me those? Because I don't have anything prepared.
Well, they were on my original guest survey thing, but they're spontaneous sort of things anyway, so it's fine. So if you're ready, I will.
Shoot, I can't guarantee a good answer, but I'll do my best.
Erika, I don't think you could give a bad answer. What 6 words would you use to describe yourself?
Um, I was actually once did an inquiry into this as an actor, and I could give them to you now, I think. Um, Vivid,
Vivid.
bantering,
Mm-hmm.
forthright, uptown, off kilter, and can we just cut to the chase?
Wow. That's awesome.
That's pretty much me.
That's
And
great.
tender-hearted.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you wouldn't know it when you first meet me because I seem like a very snappy piece of cheese, but inside I'm actually super loyal and feel things very deeply and I'm very tender-hearted and I already love you. So,
Oh, I love you too. And anyone who reads this book would know that about you. Absolutely. You have to go
next
out and buy
question.
this
This
book.
is good. This is fun.
What is your favorite way to spend a day?
In the garden. I am a gardener. If I could just be out digging and planting and weeding and watering, I'm pretty happy with that.
Flowers, vegetables, mix?
I'm growing native plants. I'm trying to transform my little yard into a native habitat. So I'm looking to bring in the birds and the butterflies and the
Nice.
little creatures, but I love it all.
That's
And I
awesome.
grow food as well.
That's great. My back can't do the gardening anymore. The stooping, I just can't.
Oh,
And the knees and yeah, 53 is not
the last thing I'm going to dig will be my own grave gardening.
nice. Nice. Okay, so in this elaborate web of yours, what is your favorite childhood memory?
Mm. Oh my God, that's hard. Favorite childhood memory. Um,
One of them.
okay, here's one. I was just remembering this because I was just in New York. I remember that when I would get sick, my mother would come in at night and I'd be all feverish. And I'd lie on my bed and she would rub witch hazel into my skin to
Wow.
cool me down. And the feel of her hands and the smell of witch hazel to me is just, it's heaven. And it was one of the moments where my mother was just physically tender with me. And so that's a very cherished memory.
Very palpable. Very sweet.
Yeah.
Very sweet. Wow. Very cool. What is your favorite meal?
Mm. My favorite foods are I love lobster, like you can't even imagine. And I love dim sum. And I live very close to a part of Los Angeles called Alhambra,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very rich Asian community and many incredible dumpling restaurants. So I go with a group of friends every like 6 weeks or so, and we get a giant table and like 12 of us just order everything on the menu and eat until we can eat no more. And that's
That's
one of my
awesome.
great pleasures.
I love the foods that are served in a bazillion little dishes.
Yes. And everybody's sharing
Yeah.
and everybody's cross talking and dipping and pouring. And it's fantastic.
Fabulous. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things about big family dinners. My noisy, crazy family, which is really my stepmom's side of the family, it's just a riot. Just love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. Okay. What one piece of advice would you like to give your younger self? I think I have a clue as to what you
I
might
think
say.
I may remember answering. These questions are coming back to me now. It would be don't be so hard on yourself, Erika.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't be so hard. Yeah, the world is hard enough. You don't have to be hard on yourself. But that's a fatuous piece of advice because when we're young, we do what the world we are who the world tells us we are. We live inside of that limitation. So that's wisdom that comes with age.
Yeah, absolutely hard one. Like if I was to try to go back and tell myself that I was more than my relationship with my mother would allow me to see, I
Yeah,
probably wouldn't have believed my older self anyway.
of course. Yeah, of course not. You
So
wouldn't.
it's a waste of time. It's
Alas.
nice to imagine,
Alas.
alas. And what is the one thing these questions are crazy, that you would most like to change about the world?
I would like to do away with separation. I would like the world to understand that we are one thing, that each of us, as we are all individuals and we are fractals, we are just a reflection of the whole. Yeah. And that the sooner we can figure that out and come to each other with compassion, and again, not to beat that drum again, but that means you have to come at yourself with compassion first. Yeah. But if I could just do away with the separation, which is the root of all evil in this world, you know, binaries suck. Yeah. And I would do away with that. And we would be in Eden, I think. Mm. And we would see too that we are the world, that the environment is us, all of it. We are it and it is us. Yeah.
Yeah. We're poisoning ourselves and poisoning our environment. And
yes,
until we stop all of this toxicity, we're not going to get better.
And all of that separation is lovelessness, and lovelessness is separation. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was having a very similar conversation with my students yesterday morning. They weren't quite awake enough to respond, but I was having a nice monologue.
Well, you know, good for you for introducing them to that.
I'm trying. You know, this year is difficult in the middle of the pandemic. I teach in 11th and 12th grade English, and some of my juniors haven't been in school since March of their freshman year.
No, my partner teaches 9th grade English in a public school here in Los Angeles, and he's saying the very same thing. I mean, it's just so hard.
And they're anxious, and they're nervous about being in school. They're not comfortable in their own skin. They're all wearing masks. They're afraid they can't be seen and heard.
Yep.
You know, it's just a level.
It was hard enough before.
Right. They're dealing with puberty and being a teenager. Freaking hell, yes. I would never do that again. And they're doing that in the middle of a pandemic, and there's all sorts of emotional, mental health, financial, every kind of crisis known to mankind in their homes. Yeah. And they're all shell-shocked. Every single one of them has PTSD from this. They're freaking nuts. So I devote Fridays to teaching them how to care for themselves.
Oh, that's great.
We're doing tapping, and we're doing yoga, and we're doing meditation, and we're teaching them breathing activities. And we're doing every single day we do journaling. Tomorrow we're doing art therapy, because I'm an artist also. So we're talking about their homework tonight is to watch a video about the medicinal power of art.
Yes.
And tomorrow is art. Their homework is to bring in magic markers, and we're going to do neurogenic art. And, you know, anything and everything that I can bring to them. I'm like, you don't have to love any of this, but maybe something I'm throwing at you will stick and help you get in touch with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's really great.
It's all about giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves. And there ain't nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
Thank you so much for being here, Erika. This was a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. I was looking forward to it for quite a few weeks.
Yeah, me too. I'm so glad we finally made it work. Really, it was great.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Permission to Heal. I hope you found it moving and inspirational. Please remember, you don't need anyone else's permission to trust and follow your heart. You have the power within you. Subscribe to Permission to Heal so you don't miss any new episodes, and please share this with your friends.